Yeah, he's on. So that's good. You can't get on because no internet?
Hello.
How you doing, everybody?
Good.
I'm just changing my view here. Okay, I see Joe's with us. Elena's joining. Hey, everyone. I think we got everyone here, right?
We're
missing
just waiting for Anna to log on.
Oh, yeah, that's
She's having a little technical difficulty.
it's okay. Humid today.
Oof.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out though. When the breeze blows, I'm almost like, eh.
Yeah, it was cold. It's crazy.
Anna, you want to just watch it here? Yeah. No, we're just waiting on you. No pressure, though. All right.
Okay. So we have everyone here now, right? We do.
Yes.
Thank you, sorry.
It's okay, no worries. Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order on June 12th, 2023 at 5:04 PM. First, public participation. Did we receive anything, Anne?
Nope, we didn't hear from anyone.
Okay. All right, well, why don't we dig right into it for the water rates? Matt, did you want to kind of give a quick overview of the options?
Sure, if that's your preference, we could do that.
Process wise, just Shane's new. I just want to make sure everyone sees it thoroughly.
Okay, so you don't want me to review the slides, just talk about them? Is that what you're
No, you
suggesting?
can you can review the slides. You can however you want to review them again. If you want to show the slides, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, so we met a week ago. We showed you, I believe, 2 options at the time. And there was a request for a third. So since we last met, we have put together a third option for your review. The first 2 have not changed. So the slide deck is basically the same slide deck, just with the additional option. So we can go through those. Maybe we'll just run through the options real quick, just so you can see them. I don't think we need to go through all the slides again, unless there's a question or a comment related to them that you'd like to focus on.
No, just you can give the quick overview like you were going to do. That's fine.
Okay.
Please.
One sec.
Is it letting you share?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so you should be able to see the slides now. We have, I'm going to run through these ones very quickly. So we just had some introductory slides on water. There's the review slide where we're looking back. Our slide on the projections looking forward, some of the things that are in our analysis related to this is expenses right here, 24 through 28 for water. These were all shown last time. The baseline for water. And here's rate option 1 for water, which option 1 is a level rate increase. So based on all the expenses that we've included in our analysis, based on the revenues that we've included in our analysis, in order to continue to maintain the target, which is around 8.5% of routine earnings. That's a percentage compared to the total expenses for the fund, water fund. This is a rate plan that would get you there. And we like to focus on option 1 being level, meaning if you were to just focus on consistent rate increases each of the years that we're looking at, the next 5 fiscal years, this is what we're looking at, 5.25% per year. And also to target the 8.5, this goes down underneath it slightly, but that doesn't concern me because we're projecting a surplus in the outer years and we're very conservative with our projections anyway. I shouldn't say very conservative, we're conservative with our projections anyway. Option 2 is a little bit lower for year 1 with a little bit higher in the subsequent years. This was an option we showed you last time, 4.25%. And we always include that table at the bottom so you can compare the bills, the current bill to the next fiscal year and even the subsequent fiscal years based on this rate plan. We like to focus on the average residential user, and you can see that a per bill, which is quarterly, the impact is less than a little more than $6, almost $7 per quarter. Here's the new option 3, and this came at the request of the group on this call this evening, to focus on the rate increase for water. Excuse me, sorry. For that we had the last 2 fiscal years, which was 3.5%, and what that might look like. So we ran that option for you with the same target of 8.5% retained earnings by the end of the 5-year period that we're looking at. And as you would suspect, if you're going a little lower in year 1, you would presumably go a little bit higher in the subsequent years. So we have 3.5% year 1, 6% subsequent years to get you back to that target. And the per bill impact is less than $6 per quarter. So that's only about a little more than $1 difference per bill from the other option we were just looking at a second ago. And then we move on to sewer. Sewer review slide, sewer projection slide, set the same way. Baseline slide. Option 1, which was the level, you'll recall, just for water, same thing. Also targeting 8.5%. A little bit different because sewer is trending downward a little bit more towards the outer years. But 4% per year is what we're showing here. 4% in the next fiscal year. That's about a $9.50 increase per quarter for the average residential user. And lower year 1, a little bit higher in the subsequent years. 3.25% year 1. A little less than $8 per quarterly bill for the average residential user. And for option 3, we just included, I believe, the same one as option 2. So 3.25% option for also for option 3, and you'll see them combined in a second. Here's option 1 summary where we combine the 2 option 1s together. This is the level rate plans. You can see in the blue table, you can see the level. I'm sorry, 5.25% for year 1 for water, 4% sewer year 1. This is just an FY24 rate increase here. And if you combine the 2, you can see the percent difference for each of the user examples that we've included way out to the right. That's if you combine them. 4.1%. Option 2, 4.25 for water, 3.25 for sewer. 3.3% change for the average residential user. That's just FY24 change. And option 3, again, the sewer rate is the same as option 2, but the water one we focused on going a little bit lower to match up with what was the rate increase the last 2 fiscal years, which was 3.5%. We have 3.5% for water, 3.25 for sewer. And if we're looking at just the average residential user, which is that second line down, it's a 3% total increase per bill. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, those are all the slides. Hopefully that content was what you were thinking.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Was there any discussion or did anybody want to review any of the slides or the options?
Matt, I just had one question. Can you go over what the basically what the deficit is again for each of the options in terms of, you know, we're not fully covering, we're dipping into retained earnings to cover our expenses with each option. So if you can just show again how much that is.
Yep, no problem. You're right. We are assuming that retained earnings will be used to offset additional rate increases. The reason why is because of the healthy retained earnings balances that are currently in place and projected to be in place at the end of the current fiscal year, FY23. Now, if we look on this is rate option 1 for water. If you look at the rate impact table with the dollars in it, the FY23 column, you can see what we're projecting for retained earnings at the end of the fiscal year, over $2 million. And that's about 30% of the total. So that's a healthy amount. You have retained earnings available to use if you want to use them. And we are basically assuming that you would in order to keep the rate increases down. So Lena's question, I believe, is focused on the next column over, which is the 24 projected column. That's the upcoming fiscal year. So based on our projections, even with a rate increase of 5.25% for FY24, we're still projecting that red number, which is about a $400,000 deficit in the water fund. For option 2, you would expect the deficit to be a little bit bigger because the rate increase is lower. It's not a 5.25, it's a 4.25. So this is projecting about a $450,000 deficit for FY24, even with the 4.25 increase. And for the 3.25, you're looking at about a $500,000 deficit for FY24 for water. On the sewer side, we are projecting pretty sizable deficit for 23. You can see that there, a little bit of a different scenario than what we were just looking at for water. But retained earnings projected to be about $1.2 million at the end of the fiscal year, the current fiscal year FY23. That's about 12%. So the retained earnings aren't quite as healthy on the sewer side. And with a 4% increase, so we're looking a little bit longer term on sewer, making sure we're covering the expenses that are coming. There isn't as immediate a need as there is on the water side. FY24, even with a 4%, we're projecting a small surplus in FY24. That projects to build retained earnings just slightly if that ends up happening. And you'll recall on the water side, there is a 1-year thing going on with the MWR assessment. That is a large reason why we were looking at those deficits on those slides. For sewer, there's not the assessment not going up nearly as much on the sewer side. So with a 3.25 rate increase for FY24, we're projecting a very small deficit on the sewer side, it's under about $10,000. And with a option 3 is the same. So you're going to see the same slide here for option 3.
So I kind of feel like that's where the decision lies is, you know, how much we want to be dipping into reserve or retained earnings to pay for this year's costs.
I agree, yeah. What have we, I mean, is this, just so I know too, so is this typically where we have our reserves, or I guess as far as historically, you know, what percent do we usually have them at, or what amount do we usually have them at?
I'll take a stab at that, Shane. So historically, since this group has been doing this, which is basically all of us, with the exception of you really being the new member to the group, we've been shooting for that 8.5%, but I can remember, I'd have to go back and give you specifics, but I can remember them being as low as about $400,000. And then I know during the 90s, for whatever reason, and I think we mentioned this when we were talking the other day, but the decision was made to dip it in quite frequently. So I would imagine that those balances were low like that again.
Okay.
Here are the this data is publicly available through the state on DLS's website. So here are the retained earnings certifications for the last, looks like a 10-year period.
Look at you, Matt. This is impressive.
So the number that jumps out at me is this one right here.
Yeah. Whoa.
Water got pretty low there for a little bit.
This is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Problem. Is it okay if I go back to the slides now, Shane?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. No, this is great. Thank you.
All right. So what other questions?
I don't think I have any other questions.
No, I don't have any either.
So not to complicate anybody's feelings on any of this, but it's a balancing act, right? We all know that. So how much is enough? You know, when you're having a bad day, probably endless, but how much is enough to get us through at least to a point where we're safe and we can plan on, you know, some other things. But any of these packages, options, whatever you want to call it, that are presented, I know Ann and I have talked at length on. We're comfortable with all of it. So whatever way the board is thinking on going, nothing here gives us too much agita, at least right now. you know, we know that we're really setting these for 24. And anything could change for the good or for the better for the out years. So just to keep that in mind too.
I think I'm leaning toward option 2 personally. I think the combined rate impact comes out in the vicinity of 3%. And, you know, for most users. And the reality is that because we're not increasing the base fees, you know, there's less impact on the lower end users. So, and I think 3% in this day and age with things in the economy the way they are, I think that's a very reasonable increase. So that's kind of where I'm leaning.
So nobody wanted to see anything with the base fees, did they? I know every time we brought it up before, that has always been quickly mixed. So we decided to just leave it as is.
Do we know what percent of the revenue is being collected with base fees the way this is now?
We could do it real quick.
I can get you a ballpark number.
Yeah, just ballpark is fine.
So I have it about $650,000, the sewer fund, which is about 6.8% of total revenue. For water. About 599,000. Which is 8.3% of total revenue.
Okay, thanks. So I think they're on a little on the low side, but I mean, I don't think we need to add that complication in for this year, but I would say next year we should be looking to increase the base fees at least a little bit, you know, at least at the same percentage that we're increasing the volumetric, so that those percentages don't come down even further, so that every year we're collecting more from the volumetric rate and less from the base fees percentage wise.
Sorry. I just realized too, I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge him earlier. I see Ed Dombrowski's online with us. I don't know if Ed, you wanted to say hello or if you wanted to weigh in at all. But,
Everybody, how are you? I'm just allowing you to do your advisory work. So I knew as the liaison, I wanted to just check in, and you guys will be presenting at our next town council meeting. So I'll let you have your discussion. I'm just observing. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm definitely not leaning towards option 1. I'm leaning more towards really 3, but I can see 2 as well. I wish there was a way. I don't know if I'm trying to think which. So they got waters. I'd like to stay under 4% on the water increase, but I don't know how everyone else feels.
Well, I think what I was just getting at before is that by not increasing the base fees and only increasing the volumetric, the actual increase on water is quite a bit less than 4.25 or whatever.
Right.
You know, if the combined increase on an average bill, water and sewer together is 3.3%, that's what the true impact is, regardless of how we set the volumetric rate versus the base fee.
Okay.
So again, I'd say just with this is my first meeting, you know, it sounds like we all kind of share our what we're feeling too. I'm kind of thinking option two, myself. Again, first meeting, but, that's my feeling, and, I guess my reasoning for that is, I feel it's fair. It's not as high as, say option one. But also just kind of thinking for the future, I'd rather, I guess, get a little more than not enough. Nobody has a crystal ball, so we don't know what next year looks like, I guess, but, indications would say that it's not going to be pretty. So I guess I'd rather have a little more now if, and where people understand and expect inflation as opposed to trying to get it, later on. Right, where it might be a little more difficult.
Very good point, Shane. Thanks. Well, I'll entertain a motion if someone wants to put a motion on the floor. If there's no further discussion. I know we have to vote on this tonight.
Well, so not necessarily.
No?
No, it would mean that the board would have to, you'd have to figure out another time we could meet again, if we were to leave. And not have a decision made. So, I mean, there still is, a little bit of time, I'd say. If nobody was comfortable at this point in time, we'd have to be, pretty direct, in what our assignment or any additional information might be, should we have to come back to this. And then I would imagine if there was to be a subsequent meeting, at that meeting, we definitely, just because of the way that the timing works, would have to make a vote at that point. So if anybody has any strong reservations, one way or the other, please, let's talk that out now. I don't want anybody to make a decision that they're not ultimately comfortable with, I'll put it that way.
I think between the last meeting and this meeting, I've seen more than enough information in terms of, I'm comfortable with options 2 or 3. Like I said, leaning toward option 2, but I don't really see any reason to explore any additional options. I think, especially where, Joe, you're saying you were comfortable with any of the options, right?
Yes, yeah, so we, deliberately, I think one of the things, like I said, we've learned over time is we could have went through every 10th of a percent and shown you everything. We started kind of simple, took your feedback, and then landed in, the newer option 3 here. But anything that we've discussed to this point, like I said, we can work with and we think is fair both for us and the end user. So really just comes that debate is, what do we think the future may hold, and how is that going to affect things as we go on? It's an imperfect science, so it probably the reason behind that is some of the reason why this process and board exists and performs this function, right? To get a broad perspective on things and kind of see it from all angles and try to make the best decision that you can.
And to echo that, Matt and your team, you guys did a great job presenting all this information to us. I know there's a lot of work that goes into this, but I agree with Elena. I mean, between these 2 meetings and what you've presented to us, I have enough information where I feel comfortable with, picking an option. So if everyone's comfortable, we could vote on it. If we want to talk about it more, or you want to see some other options, we're open to that too. I don't know how you felt, Shane.
No, I concur. I feel exactly the same. I also want to recognize Matt. I think the work is fantastic. It really breaks it out. Answers all my questions. As I mentioned too, I also agree with option 2 or 3, leaning towards option 2. And again, I guess still figuring out some of the process here, but I'm happy to say that I'm happy with option 2 if everybody wants to do that.
Matt, for my sake, can you flip to 3 for a minute, please?
Yep.
Thanks.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay, so typically I try not to interject too much in what the board of the conversation, but my opinion on this, I would probably say for me, option 3 is totally appropriate, and I'll preface that with the anomaly we talked about with the treatment plant last year and some of the regulatory testing that shut us down. To this point in time, we've already surpassed last year, and we stand to totally erase that. So what we'll find will happen next year, I would anticipate, is there'll be a reduction potentially in the assessment through the MWRA. The other thing, which I may have mentioned last time, I wasn't 100% sure. At some point in time, to which I don't know when, the interconnect project with Wakefield will be coming on, which is a revenue source for us. I don't think we're going to get a complete year out of it, but we might pick up a quarter and a half where we're earning a little bit from that. So knowing that those two positives are kind of looming out there, that we're forecasting to be beneficial, but isn't completely solid. I think if the board, if that made the board more comfortable with 3, that's kind of where my head's at with all that kind of encompassed into the decision.
Joe, just for transparency on the Linfield thing, that's a water impact only, right?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have anything in sewer that we know of that'll affect it like that, although our assessment's been pretty good. Some things moving down the road that we're ramping up into those, should the MWA continue the grant loan process, we're in fantastic shape. Should they not, by the time we're ready to exercise, whether it be borrowing or do it through, rate revenue, we're going to be in the point where we can continue to do capital work and things like that, and hopefully not have to, have the up and downs that we're trying to avoid. So, but on the water end, I think we're in decent shape for what the future might look like, at least in the short term, of bringing in additional revenue stream.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what slide. Hold on 1 second. I wanted to see. Go back to option 2, if you could, Matt, please. Just back 1. Thank you.
The only difference between 2 and 3 is the water rate, 4.25 versus 3.5, I think, on the other one.
Yeah, I was just double check. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I feel comfortable that I'd like to make a motion to accept the water and sewer rate plan option 3.
I'll
Um,
second that.
If I can, just 1 second, also, we're just gonna take notice of the flat rate that's included in that. I know we haven't discussed it, but I want to make sure everybody's aware of that. So, Shane, for your purposes, what that basically is there are some customers out there on wells that don't have, there's no way to measure the sewer flow. So what happens is we take the industry standard average, 3,000 cubic feet, and then apply a rate to that. There's probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there might be 70 dwellings that are set up like this. It's kind of an old legacy for some places that, their hookups to the utilities are a little wonky, but I just wanted to make sure that we're aware that that number is in there too.
Thank you, Joe.
No, that's a good point. Thank you.
And my motion was seconded by Elena, and
Yep.
all in favor? Aye.
I,
That motion carries 3-0. And again, thank you, Matt and team and Joe and Ann. I'm sure everyone that contributed all the information putting this together.
You're welcome.
Can I ask the board, so 2 more things?
Yep.
Steal the screen from you for a second, Matt.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Thanks. Can everybody see my screen here, the letterhead?
Yep.
Okay, so we have all the rate options that we just talked about. So historically, we've also done option 4 and 5. Option 4, so Shane, what this is something that we've never used, but it is in there as a placeholder, should we have to. So essentially what this is we try to be proactive and work with people to make sure that the meters get changed and updated in a timely fashion. This manual read meter fee is essentially something that in the event that someone is not communicating with us, we can't get through to them. It would essentially be after 4 billing periods where we cannot get a read, which essentially would cause us to do estimates. We can actually charge a $50 per quarter manual read meter fee. Essentially what it's designed to do is try to force someone into talking to us to get us in to be able to change the meters and things like that. But again, not something we've ever used. It's there basically as a break glass in case of emergency, as another means to try to spark that conversation. So
I like it. Yeah.
we're
Those
not
are the separate votes, Joe, right? The two of them?
Please. Yeah, so I'll go through them real quick and then we can vote, or the board can vote, but we're not recommending any changes there. And then the other thing is, so we have a septic disposal formula. I'll have to ask Tom Mullen because we never changed this. So if it's unchanged, I don't know if it needs to be specifically voted every year, but we will just for the practice. But what this is if someone has a septic system or something like that gets pumped out, we have to have through our discharge permit an area for that to be dropped into the collection system. So really what this is if you have a septic system and gets pumped in town, we take you to an offsite area that's secure and allow your contractor to basically transfer what came out of your tank into our system. And really all this is there's a facility opening fee that I think has been the same since pre-2018. The disposal costs per 100 cubic feet is the sewer rate that was voted on by the board. And then in the rare occasion that an off-hours disposal needed to be done, we just asked that our costs are covered. So in this case, it will actually be a 4-hour minimum at our labor union rate, which is pay grade W4 at time and a half. Less than a dozen times a year, probably 2 or 3 times a year, we actually have a request for this, but it's something that's required of us, so we include it in this process.
Thank you, Joe. I'll make a motion to keep the manual read meter fee at $50.
And I'll second it.
Seconded by Shane, all in favor?
Aye.
All right hand, right?
Motion carries 3-0. And I will also make another motion for the septic disposal formula to remain the same as well. Was that a change, Joe, that 3-hour from last time that we voted, or
Yes.
is?
Yeah, so that was just that is a contractual change that came out of the labor union's collective bargaining. So
Okay.
it's no longer a 3-hour minimum, it's a 4-hour minimum.
Okay, so I will make a motion to accept the septic disposal formula with a 4-hour minimum labor charge.
Second,
Second, all in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Okay. New business, next on the agenda, number 4. Anything new?
So we keep it basically related to water and sewer for tonight, but we had done some talking about potentially putting together a draft of what an irrigation policy might be. I don't know if Councilor Dombrowski maybe has some perspective from what they're hearing at the town council level on that topic, or I don't mean to throw you in front of the bus, Ed, but I know you're hearing things too, as we are.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, on that. I can tell you that it's really been more constituent based. I've heard from a lot of folks who are really pushing for the second water meters. The obvious overarching, theory being that they otherwise feel like they're subsidizing rates for other folks because there's the sewer component, obviously, to the current arrangement. I had a conversation with, or a meeting with Joe and Ann to at least kind of preliminarily explore this. I do think it is something worth exploring for folks. And we looked at ways that we could creatively make sure that those who might be interested in a second meter have that opportunity without having an impact on the other ratepayers who may not. And it's a careful balance for sure. I think if you speak to someone who's looking for a second meter, they would say that they, as a matter of right, they should have the opportunity to do it. Certainly, my own position is I don't think the town should be spending any funds to subsidize that. But if someone wants that opportunity, I do think that as a town, we should be able to offer it to them. So I think that that's an ongoing discussion we should probably have. And, going forward, I know that Joe had some ideas that he was kind of putting out there preliminarily along with Ann, and we ran some numbers just to see where that landed us. And I think it's probably something worth exploring in future meetings too, maybe putting it together like a little task force or something along those lines to look at it further. But it's something that I've heard in the past, and I know you guys have considered in years past. It's something that I'm hearing more and more from people in the last several months, especially.
Right. Thank you, Ed.
And if I could just say unrelated to that, I have been getting a lot of pushback, just so you guys are aware, from residents living in condo buildings because of the fact they have, the one water meter going in, and then what that tiered system looks like for them. One in particular, I've been working with on that. I understand the numbers and did a great job of laying it all out when we met, and I'm following up with that board of trustees. But I know it's a common problem. I think the bottom line is that when these developers come in, they don't spend the time and expense to separately meter all the units. And then it's impossible for us as a town to then be able to apportion to each of the ratepayers. So I can understand their concern, but on the example that Anna provided from one of the buildings in particular, or I guess several buildings in the association, it showed that when you look just at the base fee alone, at what the service fee is, because they're only charged one fee for 1 meter. If you assign that to all of the units, even if they were in a different tier, by and large, they'd probably still be paying about the same, if not more, which is interesting. Obviously, that is based on consumption, but that it's a challenge, and I think going forward, probably stressing to developers that a lot of residents are looking for individual meters. I don't know if that's going to change things, candidly, because when you're selling these units, I don't know that people are asking, oh, am I individually metered for water? But certainly once they're living in a condo building, they realize that, and then they say, wait a minute, we're being, I probably have about 15 emails from one association where they're all saying, we're being metered at the highest tier, and why is that? So like I said, I'll be talking with their trustees and inviting anyone else who wants to come to understand it. But at its core, that's what the issue is. But I've been hearing a lot more about that. Pass it along. Again, I don't know that developers are going to change their pattern, because it's also, reminds you, a huge undertaking after the fact to then go and try to install individual meters, when it's in a building, as you all know. So that's not really cost justified, and that's a big capital expense for the association, which would more than they'd never make that money back. Ultimately, but it's a big issue, and I can understand why people have the concern. I do think that the more awareness we can have for folks, so they understand the logistics of how they find themselves in the situation they do, is probably helpful. So I think when I speak with this condo association, I think it'll be a good test run to see whether some of the concerns are allayed after that. But I want to just pass it along too. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed.
I have one comment on that, Joe. I don't know if when the DPW reviews projects, if that's part of your project review to make that comment about having separate meters. But I know in Melrose, we've been including that for probably the whole time that I've been there. Whenever we review a new development, we suggest that they should put in a master meter, especially if it's going to be apartments. It's a non-issue because they can't they can't have separate bills anyway, but by state law. But we recommend, whether it's apartments, condos, put in a master meter, put in a sub meter for every unit, and then run separate plumbing to every unit. So that no matter what the future holds for the building, there will be that option down the road if people want separate meters, or at least, if the residents want to be paying according to their actual usage, even within the condo development, even if we're not going to issue a separate bill to every unit in a condo, it gives people the opportunity to get billed for their actual usage from the condo association, and it encourages them to conserve, because then there's actually some incentive because the water use is actually tied to their specific unit.
Yeah, so just the, anything that is, oh man, like single family converted into duplex, or townhouse type, I know that is something that gets included in a lot of the comments. The bigger, multi-hundred unit, I'm not 100% sure how much into detail they get with that, just because of the complexity to it. I do know there has been some back and forth conversations between our group and the ZBA talking about that. Actually, I was going to suggest if the advisory board, from a policy standpoint, would like to have a conversation, maybe we can do that. Talk about, up to a certain threshold or certain size or certain criteria, whatever that comes out to. Maybe trying to work with the ZBA, so when they permit these things, it could be a requirement or bylaw. That would be something, we'd have to start the conversation, from the town side, and then start working that into play, and then ultimately sponsoring a bylaw on that. There's some nuances we have to figure out, but certainly. So, like, the long way to what I'm trying to say is that for certain projects, I know that it's absolutely done. For some of the bigger stuff, I'm not 100% certain, but we can make sure we echo that. At least as that's our opinion. Whether or not the enforceability piece to it's there or not is one thing, but we can at least say that at that time during review that it's been brought up and advised.
Yeah, I think it's a good recommendation for us to make, perhaps formally at some point, because it is more expensive for the developer. And if the developer's building the building, then walking away, they're not owning or managing it afterwards. There's no incentive other than requiring it. No incentive for them to really do it.
Right.
I agree. We should definitely try to look into that if we could.
No, I agree as well. Yep, absolutely. And then not to go back a little too, but back on the irrigation as well. And this is a credit to obviously Joe and Ann. I went in last week to meet with them in person, but I think another alternative, maybe a less expensive alternative too, is if they could put, rather than like 2 meters, they could maybe have it coming in off the main, maybe just put a meter on the irrigation system. So that way you can see how much water is actually being used that's not going in the source system, if that's less money, right? I know we were talking about if you have 2 kind of coming into the house, that you could maybe make a connection and, try and cheat the system, if you will, as opposed to if you have just on the irrigation system, if you're metering just the irrigation, it's very accurate as far as how much water they're using. And, if they were to get a discount off the store, it would be more precise. So just want to throw that out there also.
And I think we had a sort of policy document at one point that we had issued to the council and it predates, I think, all of us on the board, but we revised it a little bit over time. But that's one of the recommendations that we had, was that they would be like deduct meters, where you'd have the master meter and then you'd just subtract off the sewer for what goes through the irrigation. So that was one recommendation. I know one concern that we've always had is that obviously if you take all of that sewer use out of the calculation, then that first year the sewer rate bumps up. The volumetric rate has to bump up to cover the difference. If you were previously collecting revenue for 1 million gallons and now suddenly you have 800,000 gallons, those are just made up numbers, but obviously you take that 800,000 now and you divide it, and then you get a different rate than you got when you had the 1 million. So, or you take the revenue and divide it by the 800 versus the 1 million, and you get a higher rate. So there would be, for all the people who don't have the second meters, there would be a bump in their sewer rate that first year. And then to all the people who do have the second meters, we also said they would have to pay a second meter fee. So you'd be paying for both meters. And I think we also said that they would have to pay the cost of the meter itself to put it in. Any cost associated with installing the meter and the meter itself, that deduct meter would be borne by the resident. So I think, I don't even remember, I think we probably had some other criteria too. And we definitely put a lot of thought into reviewing and revising that list the last time we did it. So I think any discussion for this, we should probably stick to those same sets of principles that we had put together before. And, you know, we can't make that decision mid-year because it ties in so closely with what the rate is. So we'd have to, the sewer rate anyway, the water rate should stay about the same, but we'd have to decide we're going to implement that well in advance of our rate decision for the next fiscal year, and then factor that into the model.
So I think if the timing would work out, so the advisory board actually issued 13 bullet point recommendations. And, you know, admittedly, it's probably from about a 10,000 foot look. You know, I think we focused a lot on financial forecasting one way or the other. But, you know, if you were to look, one of the recommendations was essentially whether or not the program be managed in-house by public works staff, or if not, the cost to install that would be incumbent upon the homeowner. I think one of the things by taking another look at this that we could do is make a strong opinion on that one way or the other. Do we want to be in the business of doing that, or do we not? If we are, then we know that we have to forecast some money for capital and some time and things like that. If we're not, we could cross that off the list. And if we're using it in any way to project what the impact might be that Elena was talking about, we could deduct it. And we could start to, you know, drop our view from that. So now we're not hovering at 10,000 feet, we're about 5,000 feet, and we're getting more accurate, you know, as dialed in as we can be. So I think, you know, every time we've done that, you know, presented to the town council, in my experience, you know, we've kind of given it this or that. Should we go left or should we go right at this stage? You know, we'll have X result. I think at this point, it might be worth coming up with where this board wants to go and say, you know, when we get to this, this is how it's going to work. So, you know, you're interested in this, the cost of the meter is upon, you know, the homeowner, or is it not? And, you know, clearly lay that out. So, you know, these are the things that the board is comfortable with, and these are some of the things that we'll accept as responsibility. And then here's some that those who want to benefit from this need to accept to be able to take that into account. The other thing we've always talked about too is, should we reverse this? You know, is there, what type of rate is charged for that? So does it go through the 4 tiers? Does it not go through the 4 tiers? Do we consider this a luxury? So I think dialing that opinion, you know, that's kind of neutral, more neutral than not, and coming up with more of a, you know, a firmer, a bolder line as far as where the board sits, will then ultimately shape that projection and let the town council make a decision, probably a more informed decision than we have previously. Getting to the timing, though, Elena, you're spot on. So we would do that work probably over the summer into the fall. And I would imagine if there was going to be any change to the moratorium, it would happen sometime around the first of the year to be effective next fiscal. That way, when we go into the rate setting process next year, we can encompass that into it and include it in part of the big picture analysis. So we can make sure, you know, because that will change the picture of the water potentially. And like we just said, it will change the picture of the sewer. But I think it's an exercise worth doing if we were to get our marching orders from the council to do that. So as I said last time, I would, you know, keep that in the back of your mind, because I feel like, you know, with a couple of the policy related things, that we'll have some good conversation happening in the next couple of months post 4th of July.
Joe, I just want to make one quick point about what you were saying about, you know, who pays. Since we are an enterprise fund, ultimately the ratepayer pays, whether, you know, if the town is paying for the meters, then that's not really the town paying, it's all the other ratepayers who aren't getting a deduct meter, splitting the cost of the people who are getting a deduct meter. And to me, that seems just obviously not fair, especially if the whole intent of trying to do irrigation meters is to solve this, this fairness issue about paying sewer on irrigation. So I feel like it creates a different fairness issue if you have it split amongst all the ratepayers. I think to me, it's pretty cut and dry that the people who want it should be the people who pay for it.
I don't disagree. Let me phrase that. I think the most appropriate way to say that is it a consideration that we need to budget for? So if
Yeah. So no, we would need to factor it into our rates, but I don't think it's appropriate to have to budget any capital for that change.
So I think then ultimately we talk about that the next time, then that statement is, should the board agree to it or, have consensus there, then that's something firm. There's no more, it could go this way, it could go that way. This is the recommendation of the board, black and white.
Perfect.
I
Can
don't
we
know
put,
what,
we'll put that on the agenda for next meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the sake of being presumptuous, I feel like that's something that the town council would probably like to see, or at least be able to review. So we can definitely start having conversations for sure.
Just why it's kind of fresh in our memory and we're talking about rates, so it's like it's in your head and.
Yeah,
But
I
I
like,
do agree with a lot of Elena's points there. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of dry for me, Watering your lawn's a luxury. If you want a luxury, you're gonna have to pay for it. Like I don't think it's fair, especially at any rate, for other people to be paying for someone else's luxury. Point blank.
Joe, I have one other quick question and we can get into it when we really talk about this in earnest, but did we have anything in those 13 points about whether or not the people who don't have irrigation meters would pay 100% of their water usage as sewer, or did we suggest a lower percentage?
I gotta look for that and see if I have it.
I'll resend this out to the board as soon as we conclude. Let's see.
Okay, you don't need to answer it now too. You could just send it back out to us and we can take a look.
I don't think we mentioned anything like that, but I know, so like one of the other things is we would need to update, not to be a negative, but what the policy on water theft might be. Some components as to who is eligible to this. I don't think we do, but we do mention quite a bit about rate in general. Which could be interpreted either way. So if there's a consideration we want to make on that end, we can vet that out for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just worth thinking about because we know that the people who don't have the irrigation meters, 100% of their water is not going into the sewer. And if we're starting to try to make it more fair, we could use an industry standard of what percentage typically goes into the sewer. For the people who don't get a deduct meter, they only pay 90%, 92%, whatever it is of water usage for sewer.
Yep, absolutely.
Was there any other new business or any other discussion further on that?
No, I mean, I think in that regard, the discussion is to come, right? So
Great.
It sounds like all the wheels are turning, so it should be creative and an exercise worth doing.
Joe, one last question, getting back to the other point about the multi-unit buildings. I don't know if at some point we want to consider unit averaging. I think we might have touched on it a meeting or two ago, and it can open up a huge can of worms, or maybe it wasn't here that I was discussing it with a different group. But there's always been this question of, for the tiers, should you first divide by the number of units and then assign the tiers? And it gets into a discussion of, do you do that only for true residential? Do you consider an apartment building run by a management company that's for profit Is that residential? Is that commercial? And I don't know if we want to open that can of worms, but it is to the counselor's point, it is something we might want to consider.
I totally hear what you're saying. I think for me to get comfortable with it, so from Ann and I's perspective, that kind of puts us in the middle of what could potentially be happening between tenant and landlord. So I don't know, and I'd have to ask Tom Mullen on this. I don't know if a policy move or directive where we're to take a more active role in that. I don't know what that opens up as far as like a liability for us in the future. I'd have to vet that out before I came out and decided I was on one side or the other, just to make sure. I don't want to open up a can of worms that then once it's out, it's, a problem to get back or to be able to manage it and wrangle in. But I'll do a little bit of homework on that before the next time we talk.
Okay. What about next meeting? Did we have anything in specific we were looking at?
Yeah, so typically the board kind of goes dark through the 4th of July.
Yeah.
The rate hearing or the rate proposal hearing for the council will be the 26th. So if you want, Ann and I could kind of reach out to everybody. I know it's vacations and things like that start, so it gets a little wonky, but we can either put something in now if it's easier for everybody, or if not, we can reach out and get back to you with what consensus is for availability and book it that way. It's up to the group or whatever's easier for all of you.
So, and I think I, again, spoke with Joe and Ann when I was in town hall as well. So I'm definitely one of those that falls into the vacation category. So we will be in Japan for most of July. So again, I know it's my second meeting and he's the new guy missing, but yeah, so I know July would actually be tough for me. After that will be pretty good.
Yeah.
If you guys need to meet without me, that's fine too. So I don't, obviously I don't.
Unless there's something that came up, I don't see the need to, so obviously if something came in, Joe or Ann would let us know.
Yeah, we tried to make sure that anything that was pressing business has been handled before we get to this juncture. That way, we set this and then you guys can take the month of July and kind of not be bogged down with things that Ann and I keep throwing at you.
I am here, obviously, like I think that first week of July is just after July 4th that I'll be out.
Yeah, I can't think if we had any other topics that I had. I'm just looking back here.
So why don't we do this? How about Ann or I will reach out and we'll see. We'll start for like mid-August.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll let Shane enjoy his worry-free vacation. And then if there's something that we need to have happen, we'll just have it happen. But we'll shoot some dates out in August and see what works for everyone. And then we'll get together. By that point in time, we'll have some input and some comments from the council when we set the rates and talk about everything we've talked about there. So we'll be able to hit the ground running and start doing some work.
Awesome.
Okay, if that's everything, I entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Happy
Thanks,
to. Everyone, enjoy the summer.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Enjoy your vacation, Shane.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.